to our two-pot system update. I'm Janice Mazenkamp, Head of Retirement Fund Consulting at NMG. With me is Leanne van Wyk, Director of ICTS Legal Services. Welcome, Leanne.
Oh, thank you so much, Janice, and thank you for having me again. And please just bear with me with my voice. So it's been a roller coaster, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah, I was just saying to someone the other day that I feel like I'm a little bit seasick at this stage.
Right.
I've changed the date from 24 to 25 about 6 times on the notes that I do, and it's really been quite concerning. So if I give a little background on it, about July last year, we got an update on the Revenue Laws Amendment Bill. Now, the Revenue Laws Amendment Bill, that's the piece of legislation that's got the two-pot amendments to the Income Tax Act. So that's the one we're watching.
The important one.
That's it. And so we got it then. Then, on the 1st of November, during the medium-term budget policy statement, we then saw the next version of the Revenue Laws Amendment Bill. And that was presented by Treasury to SCOF, the Standing Committee on Finance at the time, and Treasury made a number of proposals for changes to the two-pot system. And that's because they've been through a whole consultation process, right? So they've done the research on it, they've spoken to all the parties, and these changes were as a result of that. And one of those proposed changes, just one of them, but an important one, obviously, was to move the date from the 1st of March 2024 to the 1st of March 2025. Okay, right? And that's because industry was saying to Treasury, we're not going to be ready if we do it on the 1st of March 2024. So this was a generalized feeling across the industry. So we saw that proposal being made to Treasury. Then we knew that the Standing Committee on Finance was going to meet again on the 21st of November, so a few days ago. At that meeting, it became clear that they were going to accept all the proposals that Treasury had made, except the proposal about the dates. So at that stage, we saw Labour and parliamentarians and others expressing concern about the 1st of March 2025 date. And in fact, the Standing Committee on Finance saying they would not accept the proposal from Treasury to move the date from 1 March, away from 1 March 2024. Yeah, so it remains 1 March 2024 at the moment. So yeah, it's been up and down and around about at this stage. It has been very concerning.
Now, is this decision final? So do we see that 1 March 2024 is set in stone, or could there potentially be any further changes?
It's a good question, Janice, because I don't know if you've noticed, but there have been quite a few press articles out there saying it's final, it's all set in, yeah, exactly, it's set in stone. So it's actually not. Until the fat lady sings, it's really not. And the fat lady in this case is the legislation, right? So until we see the final legislation, which we've not yet seen, it could change. So it's still got to go through a bit of a process after this.
So when will the two-pot system legislation be finalised? And I think that's the key thing for everybody in the industry that's waiting at the moment, that we don't know the date. So when do we think it's going to be finalised?
Yeah, so the process from now, I'm not a parliamentarian lawyer, so it's not my forte, but what I can tell you is that it goes from the Standing Committee on Finance to the Minister of Finance. He can then comment on the legislation. He can't make a decision to change it, so that's not within his power during this part of the process, but he can comment on it, and then the Standing Committee on Finance receives those comments back and takes them into account. So one would hope that the Minister of Finance would, at that stage, caution the Standing Committee on Finance in relation to the risks that relate to, associated with bringing this date or keeping this date at 1 March 2024. So once it's gone back to the Standing Committee of Finance, it then goes through that parliamentary comment and voting process, through the houses.
Yes.
So, for example, the National Assembly will then vote on it. So, yeah, still got a way to go. So we can't say yet that it's set in stone. And then on the legislation, which you were asking about, so the two-part income tax amendments on the Revenue Laws Amendment Bill, right?
Yes.
So that's the bill we're waiting to be finalised. Now, about 2 months ago, Treasury said we would only see that next year. I'm really hoping that given this decision or non-acceptance of a proposal around this date, that they will bring that forward and that we will see that final legislation in November, December, but we don't know. But the other thing to note is that it's not just this one piece of legislation, because we've also got another piece of legislation out there. So the Revenue Laws Amendment Bill makes changes to the Income Tax Act for two-part, and then we've got a Pension Funds Amendment Bill that makes changes for two-part to the Pension Funds Act. So that's all the deductions, like 37D deductions, housing loans, maintenance, divorce, all of that. So both of those pieces of legislation have to go through. And the last time I was listening to Treasury on the second bit, they didn't have a date for when that was going to go through the parliamentary process. So we're actually waiting for both.
I mean, we're coming to silly season, so I mean, the probability of it happening now, I mean, hopefully it happens now, but we could only maybe hear about it in the new year.
That's exactly right, Janice.
And that just puts an untold amount of pressure on industry to be ready.
And what it also does, Janice, and I think that people who are outside the industry, like members, for example, don't necessarily see this, is that because industry and, for example, administrators now have to throw an enormous amount of money at this to get it up and running within the time period required, that increases the cost of this.
Yes.
Okay. And you know, whether that happens for energy or for, you know, another provider out there, it makes no difference. It happens across the board. And I just feel that it will be members who bear that cost at the end of the day. So they might be trying to benefit members by giving them access earlier, but actually, in the long run, I don't think it's good for members.
And besides the cost, it's just being able to process those benefits in time. I mean, members are going to expect that they want their money come the 1st of March 2024.
Yeah,
so
sure.
that just puts untold pressure and a rising potential complaints into the future.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You said Treasury's other proposals were accepted. What are the main proposals that were accepted here?
Okay, so there were a whole raft of technical amendments. So I'm not going to go there. You know, there's little things like improving the wording on death benefits and that type of thing. So there's a lot of that. So I think I'm just going to stick to the main ones now.
Perfect.
So obviously it's the debt.
Yes.
I mean, that's the first one. And then obviously the savings pots and the retirement pots are only going to be set up from the 1st of March 2024. So contributions will then be split between those pots, savings pot and retirement pot, from the 1st of March 2024 now and not 2025. Okay, so that's something more obvious to note. The other thing where there's a change is seeding. So I'm not sure if everyone remembers what seeding is, but really it's that amount that you've already built up in your fund when this date comes along. So when 1 March 2024 hits us, how much have you already got in your fund? And how much of that can we take out and put into your savings pot is like the starting balance for your savings pot. And remember, it's the savings pot we can take those annual amounts out of. So that seeded amount has changed slightly.
Okay.
So it used to be 10% of your vested pot, what you've got in the fund when this legislation comes in, but capped at 25,000 Rand. And now that cap has changed to 30,000 Rand. Okay. So it's 10% of what you've got in your vested pot, what you've got saved before legislation comes in, subject to this cap of 30,000. But the cap was very carefully worded, I must tell you. So, and it's important, I think, from a policy point of view, because what Treasury said is we are increasing this cap. We are doing an inflationary adjustment. Okay. Now that's important because I think what Treasury is trying to tell us there is we are not caving to pressure, you know, from Labour and others where they've been asking for 250,000 as a cap, 50,000. We are just making an inflationary adjustment. So I think that is an important message. And I'm glad to see it there. We do not want to be in a situation that Chile, for example, finds itself in, where we have this continuous access to funds that we've built up over the years.
And just to clarify, the seeding is a once-off on the 1st of March 2024, capped at 30,000.
So I'm very glad you asked that, because that is a strong misconception out there. This seeding amount, so the starting balance in your savings pot, is a once-off event, as you say. And in fact, the legislation has been clarified in that regard. It's a once-off event. It only happens on the 1st of March 2024. You don't get this every year.
Okay.
We'll talk about that date a little bit more when we talk about our older members in funds and provident funds specifically. But for 99% of the members, it's a once-off event at that date.
And so, as an example, if a new member only joined a fund for the first time during the course of 2024, come 2025, there's no seeding, you've contributed to your savings pot, and that would be what you'd be able to access.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. In terms of deductions, Leanne, is there anything that we need to be aware of there?
Yeah, so I don't know if you remember, Janice, in our previous session we were talking about the fact that deductions and the legislation around it, that is part of this Pension Funds Act amendment. But there is a little bit about it in the Income Tax Act. So what they have clarified is that 3070 deductions like divorce, maintenance, housing loans, misconduct of the employer, for example, all of those deductions can be made from all three pots. So before it's excluded the savings pot,
Yes.
you could only do deductions from the retirement pot and from the vested pot. Now it's from all three pots. I think that's sensible. And the other thing is that deductions will be done proportionately. Okay, so depending on what you've got in your three pots, it will be done proportionately. While we're on the subject of proportional, the question that I often get is, when we are taking the seeded amount out of our vested pot and we are putting it into our savings pot on the 1st of March 2024, and say in our vested pot, which is everything that we've saved before 1 March 2024, say in that vested pot we've got two layers. Right? The first layer is our annuitization non-vested layer.
Yes.
And the second part is our annuitization vested layer. Okay. The terminology is dreadful, but it is what it is, right? So where does it come from, that seeded amount? So
Yes.
say your seeded amount, say you've got a vested pot that is 200,000, right? That's your vested pot.
Yes.
That's what you saved before 1 March 2024. And let's say your seeded amount is then 20,000, right?
Yes.
10%.
Correct.
So that 20,000, does it come all from your vested bit or your non-vested bit in your vested pot? And the answer to that is now in the Income Tax Act, thank goodness. And the answer is that it comes proportionately from your vested and non-vested amount in your vested pot. Okay, so depending on what you have in there and which your vested portion, your non-vested portion is bigger, that'll determine where that seeding comes from. And of course, that is for our younger members. So members who are younger than 55, as at the 1st of March 2021. Because for all our members who were over, or 55 or over, on the 1st of March 2021, they're all amounts are vested, so it doesn't matter for them. Okay, but they had to clarify that for our members who were 54 and younger, I'm going to put it that way, 55 and younger, on the 1st of March 2021. So they are what, about 56-ish now.
Yes.
So yeah, that has been answered, and I'm glad that has, because it was a question that everybody was asking. Yes.
I mean, talking about the 55s and olders, there was
Yeah.
always talk that there was an opt-out in terms of the two-pot system. Has that changed, or is it, members over 55, we need to have a whole lot of consultation with them to explain to them that they have to actually opt out potentially?
Yeah. So the last time we spoke to the NMG clients, I remember you and I talking to them about the fact that for our members who were 55 or older on the 1st of March 2021, members of a provident fund, right? And they're still members of that same provident fund. For those members, it used to be that they were automatically in the two-pot system but could opt out. They were given a choice.
Yes.
Now it's reversed.
Okay.
And that's great. It was a result of an industry request.
Yes.
So now all those, what I call older members, although I narrowly missed that, I must tell you. So all those older members are actually automatically opted out. And they would have to then decide, I want to be in.
And I'm assuming that they'd only want to be in because they wanted to access some money while they're working. I mean, that would be really the only reason why somebody over 55 would want to opt into the 2 pots.
So cash would be your major decision, I would think. So the first thing to note is that they don't have to make that decision before the 1st of March 2024. So if you remember like that, you can, obviously, but you don't have to make that decision now. You can make it at any time.
So you have that option right up until retirement.
Exactly.
Okay.
It could be 2026 and you decide, oh, no, I want to opt in.
Okay.
But it is a once-off decision. So you can't be in, out, in, out, in, out.
So once you go in, you're stuck in it until you go on pension.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's important to know that if you opt in at a later date, so it's not opting in on 1 March 2024. Let's do an example. Say you're opting in December 2026 as an example. So in December 2026, you come to the administrator and you say, right, I want to be in the 2-pot system. They will then have to calculate a seeded amount for you.
Yes.
But that calculation, although they will do the calculation then, the effective date of that calculation goes back to the 1st of March 2024. So the administrator has to know what you had in the fund then, and you'll get your 10% of what it was then. Capped at 30,000.
Not fast forward to 2026, 2 years of
Exactly.
additional return. It's backwards to 2024.
Yeah, so you can't game the system by saying, oh, I'm going to do it in December and then I'll get a lot more investment return on this amount. Because it always goes back to the 1st of March 2024. Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, every year when we have the national budget, we always wait in great anticipation if there's any inflationary adjustment to the tax tables. Do you think that they would look at increasing the seeding amount? I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier the 25,000 inflation adjustment to 30,000. Do you think that they'd look at that annually, considering that the 55s and overs have an option to only elect to go in at a later stage?
Yeah. That's such a good question, and I'll tell you why. It's because if we look at the research that's done around the world, it talks about the fact that governments, when there is economic difficulty, look to access defined contribution funds.
Yes.
It's a way of getting their citizens out of financial difficulty, right? That's been proved, and we saw it during COVID, right? Perfect example of that. So one hopes that this does not become a yearly event like it did in other countries. And we hope that a government sticks to its policy considerations. And after that, it makes no difference because unless you amend the legislation, it's a once-off event.
Yes.
So they actually have to amend the Income Tax Act to allow for it to happen again, which is a good thing, right? But it's not impossible to do, right? So we amend the Income Tax Act every year.
Yes.
Yeah. But I'm hoping that government will stick to their policy decision on this, because it's very important that we don't see this amount creeping up and then a seeding happening every year from, for example, the retirement pot or the vested pot. We don't want that.
I mean, then from a savings withdrawal perspective, has there been any adjustments there, or is it still the minimum 2,000 Rand and once a tax year, or has there been any amendments that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so when Janice refers to savings withdrawals, she's referring to the fact that once every tax assessment year, a member can come forward and ask for a withdrawal from their savings pot. Right? That's what savings withdrawals are. And as we know, that savings pot will increase every month with a third of contributions. So that's why it's growing all the time, and you can look at taking money out all the time. So there have been no changes on the basics.
Okay.
So it's still once every tax assessment year, 2,000 Rand minimum, you have to have there, no maximum, all the same. It's still going to be taxed at marginal rates.
Okay.
But what might change is the tax mechanism for actually taxing that savings withdrawal. So it would be very difficult if we have to apply for a tax directive one at a time when every member comes forward and says, I want my savings withdrawal. Because one, we don't know what their marginal rate is. Yeah. So SARS is looking at something a bit simpler, or Treasury, like a fixed or nominal rate that SARS would then provide to the administrator, and the administrator would apply that rate, issue IP5s, etc. And they're also looking at things like bulk tax directives. But the shorter amount of time that SARS has got to look at fancy solutions that would help us a lot. The more we think that it's just going to stay as it is now,
Okay.
which means a longer process and members waiting longer for their money.
And that's going to be where all your queries and complaints are going to come from. Their expectation is that, you know, it's almost like a bank account. I'm going to
Yes.
put in my request and have the money paid out immediately.
And I'm sure that's one thing that you guys have been working on so much as NMG is the fraud prevention side
Yes.
of this. Right? You know, verifying IDs and bank account numbers, etc., so that we know that the people we're paying is actually it's the member. You know,
Definitely. Definitely.
yeah.
Then in terms of exemptions, Leanne, is there anything that we need to be or take into consideration there?
Yeah. So we asked for a lot more exemptions than we were given, firstly.
Okay.
And then Treasury said that it accepted a lot more exemptions than actually is in the Revenue Laws Amendment Bill.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a problem. So I'm just going to tell you about the ones that are in the Revenue Laws Amendment Bill. So the first one is the one that we had talked about earlier, our older members. Second one is retirement annuity funds that are legacy retirement annuity funds. These are those old ones out there that work in very specialized ways, and they can apply to the FSCA for approval to be exempted as a legacy retirement
So that
annuity
have
fund.
to apply for an exemption.
That's
to,
it.
Okay.
Yeah, and the FSCA would have to approve that. Then the other exemptions, so we got unclaimed benefit funds, not unclaimed benefits.
Okay.
Okay, so you have to be an unclaimed benefit fund.
So if you have unclaimed benefits in your existing scheme, they're not.
Two-part applies.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I think a lot of funds haven't thought about, to get rid of those unclaimed benefits come, you know, before legislation date.
Exactly. And why would you give someone 3 pots when you can't find them?
Exactly.
And you know that they're not going to be coming forward to ask for their savings pot because then you're going to be paying them their benefit, right?
Exactly.
So it doesn't make sense. But at least unclaimed benefit fund has got it.
So,
Beneficiary funds are exempt.
okay.
Makes perfect sense. And then pensioners are exempt. And that's good news because why would a pensioner need 3 pots? You're already
Yes.
paying them out, right?
Their monthly.
Yeah. So they're exempt. The people who were not exempted, there was a lot of debate around, was paid up members.
Okay.
So your paid up members are still in 2 pots, which means they get the seeded amount, they get a savings pot, they can ask for money out of the fund without telling you what to do with the rest
Yes.
of their benefit. Yeah, so that doesn't make perfect sense to me, but I perhaps understand why
The
they left it in.
complexities are still there. And for those unclaimed benefit funds and beneficiary funds, is it a formal application for exemption or is it an automatic? From
No,
the-
it's automatic, they're
Okay.
out. Yeah. So they've actually just excluded them from certain parts of the additions to the income tax act.
Okay, well, I think that's great.
Yeah,
Well,
it
it's
is.
a little bit of saving in terms of work.
What I would have loved to have seen there is liquidating and closing funds, or funds that are currently closing down
Yes.
and dormant.
I mean, what would funds like that do? Can they apply for it? Can they apply for extension, or do they have to still apply? Do the rules apply to them? So
Yeah.
how does that work for those kind of funds? I mean, if you're winding down a fund, you've got no contributing members, there's no asset there, you're going through the process. I mean, what a pain.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, why? Because generally those members are moving off, and that's what those funds might try and do now. Get those members out of the fund so that any amendments to the 2-pot are really very narrow. Because at the moment, for those members left in those funds, you're now got to create seeding and
Yes.
savings pots for them, and they can come forward and make application for claims on your fund. And
Yes.
why would you want that on a fund that is closing down?
100%.
So it doesn't
more
make sense.
complexities.
So yeah, those exemptions are great. I think that they didn't go far enough, but at least we got some.
It's some more than nothing.
Yeah,
Better.
exactly.
Could we still see changes to the 2-pot system, and how does this impact on preparations?
Yeah, so that is a very difficult question, Janice, because really, what the dilemma that we're in is the chicken and the egg.
Yes.
Do we wait for the legislation because it could still change? Right? Until that legislation is gazetted, it can change.
Yes.
So do we wait for that? Or do we start doing what we can do? And generally most people have done that.
Yeah.
It's just start doing what we can do. So a lot of people have taken a decision to say that legislation that we saw on the 1st of November, we're going to take that minus the date,
Yeah.
and we're going to use that to do as much as we possibly can. And that includes you know, everything from systems and portals and applications and communications and rules, etc., to do what we can. Because of course now we've got to amend our rules.
Yes.
Right. And so what the legislation says is that your rules have to be amended before the 1st of March 2024. And if you don't have your rules amended before then, that puts your tax approval at risk. Okay, which is a big stick. Yeah, it's quite a big stick. So that means like this crazy mad dash to get our rules done. But at the same time, we still haven't seen the FSCA's guidance note about the rules, because of course they don't want to issue that until they've seen the legislation.
So everyone's almost hiding and saying, well, we can't say because just now you want to point the finger at us that we've told you X and it should be Y.
Yeah, but what I have seen, and I was actually quite glad to see it, was a number of large administrators who came out after this whole debacle at the standing committee and said, well, actually, we're not going to be completely ready. And just saying it flat out, we can't do it. And that honesty is good to see, because basically they're saying to government, if you do this, you need to understand the risks.
Yeah, associated with that. I mean, you spoke about rules having to be registered before the 1st of March, and we all know the FSCA's timelines can be a little bit tricky. Will the FSCA be able to register all those rules in time by 1 March 2024?
I think it's going to be a real stretch for them. That's my view. Before this whole roller coaster on the date, they were saying that they would be ready, and that they would have the resources in place to ensure that they could put these approvals through as quickly as possible on the rules. Whether that still applies, I don't know, because of course there has been this up and down on the date. But they did say they were going to be ready. Whether SARS can be ready in time, that is also something to be looked at. SARS, of course, can just do tax directives as normal.
Yes.
But then everyone's going to sit and wait.
Right.
So, as I say, the fancier solutions to that will take time.
Yeah. I mean, that you could maybe only see in a year's time. So they'll go through this painful process, potentially over the next 12 months or until such time that their systems are updated and more sophisticated.
Exactly. And talking about a painful process, how are you guys finding your getting ready at NMG? What are you doing? What are the things that, the smart solutions that you're putting in place?
Thank you, Leanne. I think we've all been working hard towards being ready for 1 March 2024 and then 2025, and now we're back at 1 March 2024. We're doing a lot of work in terms of communication. I think that like most players in the industry, you haven't sent anything out because there was this limbo period, but there's bucket loads of work that we've done from a communication perspective. So we'll continue to engage with our management committee representatives and our boards of trustees to fine-tune and distribute that communication. We're working with our legal team to make sure that rules are going to, some form of a draft will be available for distribution. I think, and we all know that that's going to be a lot of work to get those ready. So I know we're working with yourselves and making sure that we have a proper, decent template that we're able to submit to the FSCA and hopefully not have any queries on those types of rules. From an admin system perspective, we're in testing phase already from November. So even though in the beginning of the month we were looking at a 2025, we still went into testing. But I think the two big things that we're quite excited about is how members are going to be able to process a savings withdrawal. So
I've heard you've got a great solution on WhatsApp.
So we've got two different forms that we're looking at. So the one, to your point, of the WhatsApp. So we have a great technology from a WhatsApp perspective that works with our eMSpheres, our admin system, and a member or employer would be able to submit a savings withdrawal claim through WhatsApp. And all of that is linked to the administration system. All the verifications would happen through the admin system for us to then be able to pay the claim. So make it really fuss-free.
It's very exciting.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
And then the other one is our easy development, which is through our web. And again, a member or employer would be able to submit a claim via the web. All those verifications again would then happen and then feed into the admin system for that claim to be processed. So some exciting things coming from the business to assist with the influx of claims. But we're all working very hard, all the different business units working hard. We have a steering committee making sure that we are not leaving anything off and really working hard to be ready for 1 March 2024 should it go live. We're all waiting, but we are working
the most enormous amount of work, and the complexity of it just cannot be underestimated. And even when they make the smallest changes, like they did on the 1st of November, the ripple effect of those changes is just enormous.
Definitely. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Leanne, and giving your insights. I really appreciate it. So,
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that.
Only a pleasure. And thank you to all for listening. And we will definitely have another webinar or video recording as soon as we know more information around the two-pot system. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.